Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the special meeting of Las Cruces City Council. Today is Wednesday, March 4th, 2020. It's approximately 8 a.m. Before we get started, if you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance, please.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. So we've got 3 items on the agenda, and you're going to go over those, Amber?
Yes, myself and Jen Reinkelt from Novak. Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Amber Vaughn. I'm the Interim Chief of Staff. I've got Jen Reinkelt from Novak Consulting to go over the City Manager recruitment with you. Today's agenda will be an overview of the current recruitment process to date, finalize the interview logistics, and then we'll discuss the next steps. Thank you. I'll hand it over to Jen.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me here this morning. I'm excited to be here to give you an update on the Las Cruces City Manager recruitment process. As you had the opportunity, I know Amber said you had the chance to look through your binders and review the candidate review memo. So we had a really good response to your job posting and the recruitment for the city manager. We've received over 100 applications. And so just to let you know where we were at to date, me and my staff had the opportunity to screen and review all the applications. So we looked through all of them. We conducted phone interviews, internet research on the candidates. What we brought to you today is what we felt were the top 10 candidates. It's always hard to know what's the right number to bring. We could bring a top 20 candidates, but it's really hard to narrow down if you get too many in that top pool to decide who you want to invite to participate in the interview process. But at this point, I brought you 10. I did phone interview more than that, but I felt like it was appropriate to really find candidates that most closely matched your minimum and preferred qualifications and your ideal candidate profile. So I always remind everybody to go back to our recruitment brochure, the ideal candidate profile that was developed, and the minimum and preferred qualifications. And it always becomes increasingly difficult as the pool gets larger. It becomes much more competitive because you have candidates who have longer tenures or really strong experience in one particular area, specifically in this search for local government. We ended up with a really competitive pool. And so I think that also gives a lot of credit to your organization. We had a lot of candidates who were very familiar with your organization who really wanted to work here. So it was a good competitive pool. I'm happy to answer questions about that. But I know you've had the opportunity to look through some of their materials. We'll talk about that more in depth this afternoon. I have extensive phone interview notes. I spent over an hour with most of them on the phone, asking very specific questions that really got to your preferred qualifications, specifically about things such as working with diverse stakeholders, at-risk populations, economic development, community engagement, their budgeting and capital planning experience, really getting into what you determined were your preferred qualifications. So we can talk about that more in depth later this afternoon or this morning, but I think for most of the candidates, I have interview notes that are probably between 5 and 6 pages for each candidate, so you'll be able to learn a little bit more about their history, background, and why they're interested in this position here in Las Cruces. But I'll open that to questions. I know that there's been some questions about how we get to the candidates, the slate that I present to you, and how we get to that magic number.
So Jen, if I may interject a few things, because I know that many on the council are new to this process. And let me just share with you what my idea or thinking was. Obviously, and you did a great job in getting 100 applicants to apply. And it's and I'm not saying that the council can't see the 100 applicants, which I know if they want to, they can. But what I was envisioning was that you do what you did, and that is give us what you feel is, say, the top 10. Mm-hmm. And my suggestion might be, and of course it's up to council, is that we take those top 10, we discuss that in closed session, and we maybe come back with 3 or 4 or 5. Or, and then those are the ones that we would have interviews with if we choose to. And then discuss the next steps on that.
Mayor, that's exactly right. That's when we talked about the recruitment process and the candidate review process. Yes, this is a slate. These are the top candidates for you to review and decide who you want to invite to participate in the interview process. The expectation is not that you would invite all 10 to participate. The process is, the candidate review process...
I'm sorry, can you just repeat what you just said? Did you
Yeah.
say that the expectation is...
Yeah, the expectation is never to have you or any governing body invite all the candidates, the slate that we present.
Yeah.
This is to provide you, because you've hired us as a recruiting firm to provide you the screening process. So we screen the candidates, we bring you the top candidates based on your minimum and preferred qualifications, and then you look at that list, and then you decide who you want to interview. And so that's what we do this afternoon, is we decide, or later this morning, you learn about each candidate more in depth. I can answer questions that can help frame your conversation, but you would decide who you would invite to interview. And it's typically 4 to 6 candidates. It's almost impossible to get more than 5 interviews done in a day. So the job is to narrow down that pool. And that is why if we bring you a larger slate, it becomes increasingly difficult to narrow down that pool. You need a pool to be able to look at. That is why you've hired an outside recruiting firm. Whether that was us or anybody else, they're going to bring you a very small subset of that 100. They're not going to bring you all 100 applicants. They're going to bring you those that most closely match what you're looking for in the ideal candidate.
Okay, so let me also ask you this. So let's just say of the 10, I'm just using hypothetical, they like 3. And they may, I think maybe one council member may have seen some more candidates, and can he or she then request, I guess what I'm trying to say is I know I know they can do this. They can go ahead and bring in a couple more from that list, and or even if they happen to have one that might not even be on the list. This is what I'm trying to convey to the public and to council is this is our one employee. And this is, we use Novak to help us find the applicants and interview. And, but we ultimately have that leeway if you feel that there might be 1 or 2 candidates that didn't appear on the top 10, but you really feel you want to interview them, or if there was just if the number 1 city manager in the United States just wants to you know them and you want to reach out to them. That can be done.
Mayor, to answer that question, certainly, if there were other candidates that the body would like us to look at, we would do that. However, I work for the body, just like your staff does, just like your future city manager does. So it wouldn't be about one particular council member saying, interview this candidate. We would need to devise a process to have you, whether talk to me over the phone or have an executive session with your staff to determine as a body, these are the additional 3 we want to interview, or have Jennifer phone interview. But it's not about picking and choosing. Each one of the council members doesn't get to say, I want these 2 interviewed. We need to, as a body, agree, or at least the majority of the body to come to consensus. But certainly we can include more.
So let's just use the hypothetical. Let's say we have 5 now. So let's assume that, then let's just go to number 2 where it says finalize interview logistics, please.
Yeah, so let's talk about the interview process. Right now we have the interview process scheduled for March 17th and 18th. So it's just 2 weeks away. That was the date that was set by the council. It should be on all your calendars. So it's a 2-day process. And so the typical interview process would be a panel interview with the council on the first day. At the end of day 1, you would decide who you wanted to invite back for day 2 activities. And that's typically narrowing it down to the top 2 candidates. But what I would like to hear from you today is if there's other panel activities or community activities you would like incorporated. Oftentimes, there's a panel that involves your executive leadership team or your department heads. Sometimes there's a tour of your community. Sometimes there's a community open house. So we need to know as we frame and develop the schedule what it is that this council wants. And sometimes governing bodies want to really be the deciding factor and really lead that process. So I don't know what makes the most sense here in Las Cruces. You do.
Okay, so Jen, just to clarify, so what you were thinking were those 2 days, and I'm glad you discussed that because, so you were thinking that, let's use the example of 5. So let's say we did 5 on that first, was it Wednesday?
It's a Wednesday.
Okay, Wednesday. And let's say we want to then come back the next day and then interview those two of the five?
The top two.
Okay. So then what I think, and then again, I'm going to open up the council here, but I would think then on that second day, we can already figure out when to meet with staff and then also to the public. I think it's important that we do something with that. So I just wanted to go through these.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the next steps we understand, you would negotiate, you have to do the background and things of this nature. So I just wanted to get really real.
So typically it would be on the first, like let's say Wednesday we invite the candidates in. A typical process would be the first candidate would take a tour of Las Cruces that's given by key staff members. Then they would go into a panel either with you or with the leadership team. So they would have an all-day activity of panel activities. And then at the end of the day, we seek stakeholder input. So I would debrief with the panel, the tour guides, with the staff panel, and I would bring that to the council. And so you would have all that input when you start making your decision about who you wanted to invite back on day 2. Because it's a decision-making process where you all have to come to a consensus about who you think would be the best candidate to bring back to the table. And then sometimes communities involve an open house component or a stakeholder component, and we would need to decide where you wanted to do that. Was it a breakfast? Was it the night before? But there's also an opportunity there to engage the public. But we would probably need to know that relatively soon, because as candidates are making their flight arrangements, they need to know, or driving in, when they want to arrive, when they need to be here, and get it on staff's calendar. But the process could also be very streamlined. It could be on Wednesday, they meet with you. You convene at the end of the day, decide who you want to invite back, and then on the next day, you just meet with the top 2. I always say that the second day is an opportunity for you to interview the candidates, but they're really interviewing you too. It's a two-way dialogue to really see if it's a community and a governing body that they can work with.
Okay, so that's plan A. Now let's go to plan B. Plan B is just a hypothetical. Completely set of candidates they want to interview. Then what do we do?
Well, so no matter what, you're going to have to develop an interview process. So
specifically, those dates that you have for...
It actually doesn't matter to me what dates you pick. You're going to need to decide an interview process so we can develop a schedule. So I do need to hear from you as to what you want your process to look like. I can't guess. So do you want a tour? Do you want your leadership team involved? Those are things that you will have to convey either to me or to your staff so we can develop the schedule. And I don't have a preference if it's a Wednesday and Thursday or if it's the next week. So, but right now you have it scheduled on the 17th and 18th. Okay. If we get in today and you say, scrap all these candidates, we need to go back out, we can do that. But we're going to have to probably
I don't think that's the case. I'm just coming up with so now I'm going to open it up, and now I wanted to have a little gamut of what...
But we can certainly do that. Sure. There's no problem in moving that out. We could also think about other alternative screening methods. We could do Skype interviews, WebEx interviews in the middle of it. If maybe there were some you were thinking might be a good candidate, but you're not sure before you want to bring them out, we can play around with the schedule.
Something just popped in my head. I just want council to know. Years ago, we had one where we actually had them do a video and send it to us. And it was pretty interesting. We got to see how creative they were or not creative. Mm-hmm. One actually did one in front of a fireplace, like a fireside chat. But actually, I think Robert even did one. Because Garza, I seem to think, I'm seeing the things that he did. Yeah, I think he did. And so it's interesting how they talk to the camera and how they so something to think about. It can be kind of creative, but nonetheless, I want to just kind of give a little gamut. Now we'll open it up to council, and so Mayor Pro Tem and Councilor Bencomo.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate all the work and consideration. I was excited to hear that we had a little over 100 applicants, and pardon me, and to hear your process, what you did, the phone interviews, taking 5 to 6 pages of notes, I was one of the ones that suggested to look at the the rest of the poll to see who was there and available to us. And so my questions are more specific in regards to how are we going to develop interview questions? Are you going to be asking our interim chief of staff and those of us on council what those interview questions look like? And so I'll stop there so you can answer that.
That's a great question. And so that's actually part of our conversation when we think about interview logistics. So typically, I do provide you draft interview questions to get your feedback. But my understanding is because this is an open meeting, we don't want to talk about our interview questions in a public setting. So I think a better way to talk about that are things like thinking about themes or topics that you would want to ask the candidates. And I came up with sort of a list of topics that we normally touch on. But yes, we would provide that. I'm going to actually ask your legal counsel here for advice if they can, if we can email draft questions. Do they have the opportunity to provide feedback that way? How would they be able to provide feedback on interview questions?
Robert Cabello, Assistant City Attorney. I think the best way would be to provide that information to this interim city manager, and that way you can get to the staff and then they can communicate with you.
Okay. Well,
we're probably going to, since the interim city manager is a finalist, we'll probably just refer everything to to Barbara De Leon.
So what our plan was today was to hear from all of you what types of questions you feel are most appropriate. If there are specific areas you want us to hit on, we will draft interview questions. I have a phone call scheduled with Joe and Amber and Barbara to make sure we fine-tune that to meet your needs. So we will help really craft questions that meet the needs of the council. And there will be opportunities before the interview process to review those questions and refine them. I think it's always important to ask the same questions throughout the process and be consistent. So that's one of the reasons I'm there. I'm there to make sure we stay on time, everybody gets the same amount of time, and that we ask the same questions. But there's certainly flexibility if we get in there Wednesday morning and we're like, oh, we didn't have a question about their experience dealing with economic development in an area in the community. We can certainly frame that and develop a question. We would just want to make sure we ask that to all the candidates. So whether that's where you look at it ahead of time or we look at it the day of, I will take your feedback today and kind of craft questions that are most appropriate for Las Cruces. And I'm going to let Amber or Joe, if there's anything else.
I'm not done yet, but
Good morning, Council. Joe Richards from Human Resources. I would agree with Jennifer. Typically, we would craft those questions and take an opportunity to meet with you and make sure that we're hitting the points that you want throughout the interview process and make sure those questions are consistent throughout.
Okay. So my feedback would be to ask questions, obviously, around communication, collaboration, the highlighting sort of looking at our strategic plan and sort of what our vision is for the next 5 years and crafting those kinds of questions. Of course, strengths and the areas that they feel they need to improve, how they're going to involve staff in their decision-making processes, I think are really important. The other thing is I like, Mayor, the idea of a video. I think that really, I'm very visual, so I'm reading the resume and I'm like, I would really like to see a picture of them, right? But so then I had to go back and Google and try to find pictures and information about them to sort of understand where they're at. And I'd really like to see sort of a plan of action in terms of their first few their first few months, things that they would like to he or she would like to see happen as it relates to starting here with us. The other thing that I would really like to see is I think a tour is a good idea. I think it's important for people to understand our community, and I think what's important, not only a tour of obviously the city facilities and whatnot, but in our city, each of our districts. I really want this individual to understand, sort of the strengths and weaknesses, things that we need to work on for each of our districts. I think is really important. The other thing is I was a part of hiring our executive director for our animal services board. And we gave the candidates an opportunity to meet the public, but in a very organized fashion, in that the public had questions that they would like to ask so they could get a feel for this individual. So it was done with a facilitator. That was probably one of I continue to hear lots of feedback from people who participated that it was something that they really appreciated, because they got a better feel for the candidate and what they stood for and those kinds of things, and being able to answer questions sort of on the spot without having, being prepared for, I think is also really important. Lastly, I am also thinking that in some of the other interviews that we've hired, like police chief and so forth, we had that, I think at least 3 panel of interviews where they were with the business organizations, community organizing, nonprofits, if you will. And I think that's something that we certainly should consider as well. So that's my feedback at this point. Thank you.
Those are great ideas. And for the record, we did not hire the police chief. Okay, so I think, No. I think what the Mayor Pro Tem was talking about, when they did have that, they had that set up for the chief. Okay. Councilor Bencomo, and then Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Can you repeat your last name for me? It's Reichelt.
Reichelt.
Thank you,
Yep.
Ms. Reichelt. I appreciate the information you've provided. I have a couple questions, and then I'd like to say something. It seems like you currently have a lot of information, perhaps a lot more information about the candidates than we do right now. Will you be sharing a summary of the conversations you had with us eventually in closed session, or?
Have the opportunity to have a pretty in-depth conversation on each of the candidates, and you'll have all the information I have. I'll be sharing it with you. You'll have all the documents as well.
Great. So, at what point in this process do we get to hear from candidate references?
So once you select the candidates that you want to interview, we start doing the reference and the background check. So once you narrow it down to those you want to invite to participate in the interview process, that is when we do the extensive reference checks. So that's where we ask them about previous supervisors, current supervisors, peers, coworkers, those types of things. And then that's when we start the reference checks, or the background checks, because there's a cost with every reference check, every background check. So we don't want to do that for 100 candidates. We want to make sure that we're doing it for those that you're most interested in.
Do we only reach out to references that the candidate lists, or are we reaching out to former employers regardless?
So this is references, so it's not typically a background check. So the references are references that they provide. So.
Yes, okay.
Joe wants to.
Excuse me, Mayor, Council. Typically with the city, we do reach out to prior employers to get those reference checks as well.
Great.
But I would say that most of the time in local government, do they speak to you other than verifying employment?
Mayor and Council, sometimes it does depend. They're not always easy to obtain. A lot of organizations now go through automated systems, but we still make that effort.
Yes, I would like us to for sure make that effort.
So I will say that the background checks verify all employment and education. So that is what we do. And we certainly can look at the reference process, but what is in our proposal and what we do and what we've talked about is a process. If it's something that you want the city to do after the fact, we can certainly expand it further, but we typically talk to 3 to 4 references. It's a current, former supervisor. I mean, in a lot of these cases, commissioners, council members, mayors. It's somebody that they worked with, a peer, and an employee. We certainly can reach out to local governments, but typically they're not going to, at this level of the position, give you information without being like a listed reference.
Okay, I definitely would like us to make an effort. I would also like to suggest that we do, excuse me, a staff panel for sure. I don't know if that's been planned, but that's certainly something I'd like to see. I mean, I know that this is our one employee, but essentially a city manager has many employees, and I think that they should get a say in the process for sure. I don't know how we've done that in the past. Perhaps, I don't know, how many departments do we have? We have a lot of departments. 20?
We have 1,600 employees.
Right, I knew that. So I guess I was thinking perhaps a department could nominate someone from their department to be on the staff panel. But I don't know how feasible that is.
Mayor and council, I just wanted to mention, we do have 13 departments.
That seems like a totally doable staff panel.
So typically that would be your leadership team, because those are the direct reports that report to the city manager. And then if we were looking at involving other staff, there's ways to incorporate them into the process, whether that's specifically an open house or an event that all staff was invited to, so then they all had the opportunity to meet the candidates and provide feedback. We have ways to engage their feedback and gather input, but we certainly could look at something different if you wanted to have more line employees. They're just not directly reporting to the city manager as their leadership team would. So that would just be the difference. But we could have 2 panels if that's what the council wanted.
I think for sure a staff panel is needed. I mean, this is who they're going to be working with, and then maybe the community panel, which includes businesses and nonprofits, perhaps.
I think that's right. I mean, I think you're right. Like, a lot of staff don't directly report to the city manager, but the city manager certainly has a very big ripple effect throughout the city. So to me, that feels important. And then the last thing I'll say is that perhaps it's because I'm a new counselor, but I feel very rushed by the process as it currently is. Scheduling the next 2 interview dates already, 2 weeks away, to me feels, I mean, this is a very urgent matter, and we need to hire a permanent city manager, but for me, in order to hire someone that is strong and powerful and fits, I don't want this process to be rushed.
Remind the council, I did not select these dates. The council did. The candidate review meeting was actually selected.
I don't remember that.
It was actually selected 2 weeks ago. It was moved due to conflicts on your calendar. So I don't select the dates. I work with you and what you provide me. So I'm certainly not trying to rush the process. I'm trying to keep it moving along, because my understanding is that you want to fill the position. And typically we work within a 13-week schedule from start to finish. But if the council decides you don't want to hold it on the 17th and 18th, that is not a problem. We just have to find a date that works with the council, and that works with everybody's schedule. You're looking at 7 to 8 different calendars. We're also working with the candidate schedules. I will tell you that all the candidates know that those are the dates that you're looking at. We would just need to notify those that you're thinking about interviewing what the new date is. But it was certainly not my intention to rush you. Throughout the process, there is the beginning. It's the setting up the candidate profile, posting the position. We post for 6 weeks. We do the screening process. We do the candidate review, and then you do the interview process.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
If I may, before I get to Councilor Flores, because it's very timely. So let's just say hypothetically, go to Plan C here. Maybe 1, maybe 2, they want to interview, but they'd rather do, say, 3 or 4. It probably would behoove us to just hold off on those 2 until they get the other 2, and then do them all pretty much at the same time, correct?
Possibly. It depends. I always would encourage you to keep moving ahead, or if you decide you want to postpone, I wouldn't postpone too late. Candidates don't stay in the pool. And when we talk about Our candidates today, we have a number of them that are in current recruitments that are highly sought after. So if they're ones that you want to interview, the likelihood they will be here in a month is pretty slim. And so the longer you draw out the process, the candidate pool gets smaller, whether that's people on this list or even just people who applied.
Okay.
People who are actively applying for jobs, they're probably not just applying for your job. So we tend to lose candidates. That's not to say that 2 weeks is going to make a big difference, but I think if we moved it out too much farther.
Gotcha. Okay. Councillor Flores and Councillor Abeyta-Stube.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Ms. Reichfeld. I didn't see in my packet, maybe I just rushed through it, but I know that I personally stressed to you in our 1-hour telephonic conversation at the beginning of this process how important certain characteristics of that candidate would be. And I would have liked to have seen in your packet what we collectively did, because we do not really talk to each other about a lot of these things because there's that fear of that rolling quorum and that sort of a situation. And also because I think that we're all very independent anyway. And what we have to say is very important, of utmost importance, and we don't want to share that. But I didn't see that, and for me, I see your job, and I'm not criticizing you, please. I don't mean it that way, but I see your position, your firm, as being the recruiting firm that is going to take what we have told you and then and then search for the best candidates. And it's true, we can't do your job, but I didn't see that. And I would have felt a lot more comfortable if you or your firm had set forth all the wants and needs, more of the needs. And we need, I'll say this again, we need someone who really knows New Mexico, has been in New Mexico, with all due respect to anybody from any other part of the world. There's just something very unique about our state, and Las Cruces is very different than, anything north of Highway 40 is not considered part of New Mexico. So it's true. I mean, we're like the bastard child of the state.
Can I address?
But no.
Okay.
I'm not done.
Okay.
So you were going to say there was something in here?
Yeah, so I'm going to say that what we talked about when I was here before, we developed...
No, what you and I talked about, and I don't know, I didn't see that.
So the point of those individual conversations was to develop an ideal candidate profile. And when I was here at our last meeting, we developed the ideal candidate profile. The council reviewed it. We looked at we looked at the ideal candidate profile, and we also talked about the minimum preferred qualifications. We spent quite a bit of time talking about that. And so that took every individual's conversation and kind of took about key attributes, what you were looking for, and put it into a narrative format, your ideal candidate profile. So that took every person's conversations, your wants, your needs, your desires. It's here in that ideal candidate profile, as well as the minimum preferred qualifications. We talked about that as a body. I would say we also reviewed the first-year goals, which incorporated a lot of what you talked about during our phone calls as well. And so that's in your binders as well. But I think a lot of what you're asking, the ties to New Mexico, it's hard to pick up on application materials. A lot of what you were provided, we had to be very comfortable with being subject to public record. So I couldn't give you my phone notes. So you don't have the whole story of every piece of the material. So that's, I think, a big part of what our conversation is going to be today. Hopefully I was able to tie into some of the specific skill sets or area of interest that you were most interested in.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Abeyta-Stube and then Councillor Sword.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, Ms. Reichelt. As a new counselor, I will say one of the things when you said you talked to everybody on the council, unfortunately that did not include, I know myself and perhaps Councillor Bencomo, to get our views on what we considered an ideal candidate. So just to let everybody know, that's not a factor that I was able to give an input process for, which is why I have a lot of questions. It looks like most of them will have to be answered during the closed session. But I do want to stress, I do think it would be really good to have that staff panel with the different departments. When we look at questions for our candidates that we consider different community members and different groups, we have a wide variety from age groups, gender, race, everything. So just to make sure that we're touching upon all those, to make sure that our candidate is able to interact with all members of our community at that high standard and level that we need them to be. And I think that's all for now, but thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Sword.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Jennifer, and all. I am very interested in these candidates, and I think you were willing to share the applicants or the resumes of other candidates that are not on the list. But I'm most interested in what filters you use to select these 10 candidates here. If you can just outline it very briefly.
So I would go back to our minimum preferred qualifications here on your recruitment brochure that we developed together. So we talked about the minimum requirements for this position were a bachelor's degree and 10 years of progressively responsible experience in government. And then they needed to have a role such as an executive level management role, so a manager, assistant manager, department director. Those were the minimum. And then the preferred qualifications included a master's degree, an ICMA-CM, so a credential, and experience working in the council manager form of government. And preferred candidates would also have success with economic development, budgeting and capital planning, community engagement, working with developing partnerships, and working with diverse stakeholders and at-risk populations. So we started there, and I think then you start looking at whose experience most closely meets the needs of your council and your community. So projects, experience levels, size of community, parts of the country, whether or not I felt like almost every candidate is on that list has a tie to New Mexico or really had desire to work here in some capacity. I ask that question all the time. Why this position? Why now? That's a very typical question I always ask. I really want to hear, not just that they're running away from a job, but they really want to work in your community, that they've done their homework. I want to make sure that their experience is relative to what you need here. Not that just they recruited any business to their community, but business that would be relative and similar to your needs here. So specifically here, I looked for housing experience. I looked for things that had to do with large-scale economic development. And I asked a lot of questions about working with underrepresented populations. I heard that that was a big concern here, that you wanted to make sure you had a manager that was sensitive to those issues. So I asked for prime examples, key examples of where they had gone out of their way to reach some of those at-risk populations. We have 2 on that list that speak Spanish fluently. I have others that can read and write it. So I felt like I put together a list where everybody is not exactly the same. They're not all cookie cutters. You have some that have been city and county managers. I will say that under county governments, there's more social services and health services. You're not going to find that as much in city government, but I did hear that that was a desire here on the council. So there were a lot of things that go into the decision. I mean, we get a lot of applicants. You get a lot of people who think they can run or want to run a city. So I have people who, I think there's a flight instructor on the list. There's somebody who runs a restaurant. There's a lot of experience, and they're probably great people, and they'd be great applicants for other jobs, but whether or not they're applicable to running this organization, I think that's where it's my job to kind of filter what I heard you need, also knowing that somebody has to wrangle you together to try to get consensus, help facilitate discussions, help lead the organization. Almost every single candidate knew about the departure of your former city manager. Everybody was worried about what that meant in terms of morale and what they were walking into. What does the relationship look like? You want somebody who's asking those questions, who's aware of what's going on in your community. So those are all things that I take into consideration. I mean, there's no magic. It's not a science, it's an art. I talked to a number of people that I didn't move forward. They'd be great candidates in other communities, but dealing with diverse populations was very different than your issues here. Smaller communities, I was really looking for some folks who had more public safety backgrounds, so I talked to a few, but they were in such small communities, I didn't feel like it would be appropriate. Their skills were very strong, but your issues are more complex than maybe what they've dealt with in a community of 5,000. So those are all the things that I think about when I talk to candidates and I look at a list. I mean, it's a big list, and so you start narrowing it down as to how you want to frame it and who I want to bring forward to you.
Thank you. That was very well presented. And I can see you analyzed it pretty well. But in the end, would you admit there's a little bit of subjectivity in your decisions there?
In terms of
of who to pick for the top 10?
I mean, like I said, it's an art. It's not a science. So I think it goes to what I heard you want. I mean, we definitely look at those minimum preferred qualifications. Every one of those candidates are going to meet that.
I understand.
Yeah. So what I tell candidates who apply and don't move on to the next level, I'm like, what our response often is, it really depends on the candidate pool. If we had received 25 applicants, somebody who might have been a department head in a smaller community very well might have moved up in the pool. But we had a tremendous level and number of people who had been town managers, city managers, village managers. So then it became more about, then who is most similar to what you're looking for here in Las Cruces?
I get it. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jen. I appreciate hearing your process and sort of the questions. Did you have a rubric where you attach points to each of those questions, if you will, qualifications?
So we use a point system, so it's just 1 to 5, but so 5 are the ones that meet all the qualifications, but not all 5s move forward. It's really 1 through 5, and so oftentimes, and there's a first level of screening that happens before I even get into the system, so, and then I look through them again, so.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, I appreciate it. And we'll be able to see that?
I mean, that's my system, but yeah, I mean, certainly you're going to have the opportunity to look at the full applicant list, and you can look at their application materials if you want.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So Jen, are you going to be available if we need you during closed session?
Oh, I should be in the closed session with you, yes.
Okay. Well, in the beginning you won't, and then later, later you will. So, okay, good. Just want to make sure. Before we go into closed session, any closing questions?
Yes, one more question. You just said it's your process, so this isn't like a streamlined process through the Novak Consulting Company on how you narrow down a candidate pool for...
Well, this is the process that our firm uses, but our firm is...
That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, but...
So is it just you, or do you have a team of people helping you narrow down?
Our firm is bigger. I mean, now we're part of Raftellus Financial, so we have over 130 employees, but our search side is 3 people. So it is me and a recruitment specialist who is reviewing the applications for your particular search. If it's a different search, then it's a different lead. Catherine Tuck Parrish leads other searches.
Okay, but so for our contract that you have with us, it was you and one other person?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And Councilor Bencomo, this process did get started, I believe it was last summer. We've been, so unfortunately, you were out there campaigning at the time, but the contacts have been made, and so Ms. Reichfeld has been, Reichfeld has been working on this, or with the city. So doesn't feel too rushed to us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so looks like we're going to go ahead and close this meeting out here, and then we're going to go into closed session, and that'll be it for the rest of the day. So entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Councilor Flores, second by Mayor Pro Tem Gondeta, that we adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Okay, those opposed? Okay, we're adjourned. 8:45 a.m. Thank you.